Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining me here. My name is Mark Stignani. I am here discussing patent analytics, and AgTech in conjunction with aspects of climate change and social consciousness today. So I appreciate your time and attendance. We are still waiting for a few more people to join us here, but I will begin as soon as we get a few more people online here. I do appreciate your time and attention. So I'll start a little bit here while we're waiting for other people joining to talk a little bit about me. So I am a, shall we say, older patent attorney in this area of endeavor. So I've been working with Schwegman here for about the last 8 years. Before that, I worked a number of different roles at Thomson Reuters. Before that, I was at Honeywell. So I've been working in the last 8 years here with a lot of Fortune 50 clients that are working in portfolios all over the spectrum of technology, including AgTech clients. I'm also a patent attorney farmer. So I grew up and worked with a lot of the technologies that I see now kind of maturing in AgTech with my parents' farm over the last 35 years. So it's an area that's fairly interesting and close to my heart. And so I spend a lot of time in the analytics space around AgTech. So given that, without further ado, I'll push myself into the presentation here. So recognizing that this is a bit of a political football, and I'm here representing Schwegman. We're not here to promote or decry any political aspect of climate change, but we're simply presenting data and other types of information that are related to climate change from the largest patent filers in the world, that they are doing as a sense of social consciousness or public statement around their beliefs and structures about how their innovation fits them. So how social consciousness fits into this. Social consciousness tends to be an expression of social identity from a number of different participants. In the case of IP is a very public statement about what you believe to be new, novel, and innovative. And so I view IP filings as a way of looking at social consciousness, whether it's presented as such or not. The IP filings of these various companies do present a common sense or a common indicator of where items like climate change or greenhouse gas mitigation or that sort of stuff move forward. So part of what I'm trying to bring forward here is that IP filings in and of themselves are social commentary. So you can agree or disagree with that. I have a question and answers section, so please feel free to throw questions in and out as you see fit. Moving along here. So the presentation scope that I am working with, defining climate change mitigation and climate change technology platforms is uniquely difficult because it covers a grand scale of a number of different technologies. There's chemical technologies, there's software technologies, there's hardware technologies, mechanical technologies. So you wouldn't think it's just how to fill a farm field with healthy crops. So part of this analytic is assisted by a CPC classification. YO2 was introduced in 2010, but in looking at the technology, the filings that go along with these things, there are climate change mitigation filings as early as 1989 that call out climate change or global warming or greenhouse gases as part of their statements about what they're working on. So, the CPC class is helpful. It is not inclusive entirely, and it also is. I find it sometimes applied unevenly across different countries. For instance, I will show later that China tends to classify a lot of their materials in the YO2 classes, whereas in the U.S. it is much less of a prevalent situation. So in any event, we're talking analytics with very, very large numbers. A global 10-year view of AgTech that works around climate change or some sort of climate mitigation falls into about 82,000 filings. So we're looking at very big numbers. All of the, if I was to look at the entire YO2 class, I mean, that's over 250,000 filings. So in any event, so what I'm going to try to do here is present concepts that would be theoretically useful for making some judgments on trends. So then we'll move into definitions here. Next is what I've got in AgTech definitions. So as I've mentioned previously, that covers an awful lot of things. So I've got things like precision farming, farming using drones, mass spectrometer, views of soil, various chemical applications that either promote or support the soil during a climate change situation, a drought, heat wave, both temperature, heat resistant seed technologies, lots of software supported architecture, and as well as digital technology platforms. So it really spans the gamut. And so all of those were considered fair game for this. And if you see CCM throughout the rest of the presentation, that's just shorthand for climate change mitigation. So let's go up and cover that. So let's talk about linguistics right now. So as I went through all the various climate change mitigation types of terminologies, very few people use kind of the political football term climate change or greenhouse gases. Most of them are using various and sundry other words. So across 25,000 U.S. utility grants, didn't see a lot of, this is explicitly climate change or not climate change. I found that there were really no magic words in this presentation preparation because whether you use the term climate change or not, or greenhouse gas or not, a lot of the patent subject matter goes directly to that aspect of mitigation. So below is kind of a list of the modifiers I used as I was reviewing this. So climate adaptation, climate sustainability. Resistant was another really interesting word because a lot of the seed companies especially were talking about various resistances to aspects of global warming, temperature insensitive, or various seeds that thrive in certain temperatures and more dry conditions in a drought. The greenhouse gas stuff is largely directed towards specific greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide being one of them, methane mitigation being another big one. And they're coming pretty much all over the place. So, as we're extracting climate change mitigation or sustainability concepts, words count, and people vote with more generic words as a good patent filer would to bring as many terms to something that is more or less generic, and rather not focus it in something that might be limited in this definition. So let's talk about the YO2 classes. So these are explicit climate change mitigation classes. Again, a lot of these would apply to cars, everything from sewage treatment to scrubbing technology, carbon air capture. Carbon air capture is going to be an interesting one as we include this. So the YO2C class was particularly helpful in this analytic set. So again, this presentation will be available. So if there's anything that's too small to read or anything that is too wordy, please ignore it, and we can send you the slide deck later or make it available on our website. So these are just basically the climate change definitions. The reason that a lot of this came into being in 2010 was really from the Kyoto Protocols of '97, which the EPO especially found that there were a high degree of variability in a lot of the patent filings. So this was actually pulled out as a explicit CPC code definition to help people organize and find these things a little more easily. As I mentioned, it is still pretty imperfect, even though it's been in play for the last 10 years, especially when you're looking and searching to U.S. coding, because in some cases where you're looking for something that would be explicitly around agriculture, it's almost anywhere but in the correct subcode. So again, we'll show more of that later. All right, let's talk into the meat of this presentation now. So the global view, if we look at 82,000 climate change mitigation filings that are in the last 10 years, we have a lot of information about kind of what they are. I'm going to use this kind of chart throughout the whole presentation here because it's simply an easier way of beginning to discuss kind of what's within 82,000 filings. So, and then for those who don't want to read that, I've kind of highlighted the top 5 on the left-hand side. So as we can see here, you read this chart from the inside out. The inner ring is the primary subject matter, and the outside ring is subordinate subject matter around it. So one of the things that we see across a lot of AgTech is that bio and genomic transgenic treatments of seeds, treatments of plants, modifications, or other compositions that go with a plant really are kind of some of the biggest items out of that. And the actual mechanical manufacturing processes also represent a good quarter of it, but really the bio and genomic aspect it was surprising me, came out as fairly high. The ag chem, which I loosely refer to as everything that is basically from insecticides, other chemical treatments like fertilizers and such to help plants maintain their growth cycle either in accelerated fashion or normal fashion in light of bad weather conditions, bad climate conditions, is my shorthand for ag chem. Biofuel was also standalone by itself. So many of these plants' DNA matters were drawn towards the creation of bigger, better processes for producing ethanol. As you can see down in the lower hand corner here, you see down here you can see that there is actually ethanol called out as its own little separate category as that. Gas scrubbing, gas treatment, removing carbon dioxide, water, heat from various gases. A lot of the gas treatment, again, mitigated to a lot of this drawing towards, again, the greenhouse gas and the methane gas air or carbon dioxide phase, also a pretty substantial aspect of those 82,000 filings. So that being said, let's see who cares across the globe about these sorts of things. And I'm apologizing in advance because this slide is busy and it's pretty tiny writing on it. So I will talk to it as best as I can here. So here's the AgTech kind of in the last 10 years. And so as you can see here, there's a ginormous spike of Chinese filings here. I mean, literally, almost 10x of what the U.S. filing, which is the next closest competitor. Chinese is in red, U.S. is in blue. U.S. is maintaining kind of a 1 to 2K, 1.5K to 2K a year filing rate, whereas the Chinese have just kind of gone off the rails here with 12 to 13,000 filings a year. And so I mean this is probably because 2019, 2020 are definitely incomplete years as far as analytics go. It is highly likely that trend will at least be maintained, if not continue its uphill aspect of it. Korea, which is in orange, and Japan, which is in kind of gray, also are kind of maintaining it where they're flat or in some cases in declining their filings in this area. So you really see kind of who cares the most about this. I mean, yes, there are social programs for patent filings in China, but I'll dive into that in the next several slides here as to kind of what they're focusing on and some of the valid reasons why they might be doing this. So as you can see here, this is showing almost exponential growth, except for 2018, which is not quite exponential, but this has become, since 2012, just a really fun area to track and cover. So, as I mentioned, there's a fair amount of bias in the last 5 years filing across China. So China amounts for literally 3/4 of all filings. If you took China away, you would see the U.S. may be accounting for 30-40% of all filings, but this is a pretty stark view. And a couple takeaways to see from this that it isn't really. Europe is not really, even despite having some of the most awareness and some of the best laws around this, their filings do not represent a really strong focus on climate change mitigation. So, again, the U.S., Korea, and Japan seem to be, the full-on leaders here. So, just a unique outcome for kind of the global view on things. So, if we take, the climate change focus for all of those, many thousands of filings that China's done in the last 5 years, we see again AgChem, biofuel being probably a larger segment than we were figuring out. But BioWaste and how to handle waste came really strongly out in this analytic as well. So, as you can see here, with the laser pointer here, you can see that how they're handling waste material and the post-processing of that material, because they're such a large manufacturing outfit. Waste stream becomes very, very important, I think, to a lot of the manufacturing organizations. And then we have AgChem here, which is treatment of plants and animals and insecticides. And then down here we start to see aspects of fermentation, of dealing with various substances to create biofuel. And then up here, a small segment of AgTech. But the last 5 years, we can kind of see China really kind of beginning to pull itself together on aspects of its own process here. But here's where some of the CPC idiosyncrasies come into play. So, a good 14,000 filings in the last 5 years have been in this one CPC category, Y02A40, and there's a number of subcategories below that. Now, you can see at the bottom it says utility model, so China has a utility model filing process, so a great number of matters in this area are falling in the utility model category, so patents. But if you look at the concentration of these patents themselves in these 14,000 or more matters, irrigation, planting, and various greenhouse and kind of hydroponic production, all of these things are being brought forward in China. So China did incent making people incent people to file patents, but when you look at some of these things, there is a real, I think, message in this that 64% of the world's population currently lives in a water-stressed basin. So China has about 20% of the world's population, but only 6% of the water resources. So you can see where they're looking at all sorts of various and sundry uses of water and water piping and irrigation and how to use water storage. I mean, literally all of this is, pulling water out of the air using, plastic distillers. I mean, there is a ton of stuff here. So, again, talking back to social commentary, there is a real concern, I would say, looking at the usage in the filings, especially in this area of YO2, that shows China's real concern with their water problems as they're going forward. And this is another area where you'd think that the U.S. would have, something in here, but they had 0 filings in this category. So I think this points to a problem with the classification process of the CPC in light of the U.S. classification mode, because they certainly had very, very similar filings in these areas. They just didn't fall into this YO2 category. So this is a good cautionary tale for do not absolutely rely upon patent classifications to find everything you're looking for, because there really is not a good one-to-one some cases, and this would be a very strong example where the patents are, somehow falling between utility model filing as well as then a pure functional filing. So that goes even further when we kind of look at the next aspect where we have crossover. So I wanted to figure out how many of these these climate change mitigation patents filed in China were crossing over to the U.S. And it turns out that there's, in the last 5 years, only about mid 600s in that respect. But it's still, a significant number when you look at, the number in total. So it's not 14,000, but, a smaller percentage of that. But one of the things I would want to bring to your attention as well is look at who's filing into the U.S. And these are not individuals. They're not people who kind of are on bounty programs. These are all universities. I mean, you have some of the most prestigious Chinese universities who are taking their climate change mitigation technologies and filing them here in the U.S. Very few, if any, of these are commercial entities, with the exception of maybe Autel Robotics here. But most everybody else is somehow tied to a university. So we find that unlike the U.S., where we find much of the climate change mitigation technologies filed by Fortune 50s, commercial companies, and other automotive giants, the universities and the NGOs of China seem to be having the greatest success transitioning their technology or their filings back to U.S. filings. Remains to be seen how those are ultimately successful, but nonetheless, those are very interesting points, and we'll see that there's actually a diametrical opposite as we look at the U.S. Now, as I'm talking, I want to transition to U.S. analytics right now, but I do this because I compared the European analytics that are roughly similar and somewhat less when it comes all to the various and sundry filings. So the U.S. analytics tend to be a bit more interesting. So U.S. portfolio analytics, we're looking at about 25,000 filings on climate change mitigation over the last 10 years, I think is what I looked at in that respect. And what comes clear in this is that some of the some of the worst violators, people have been in the news for pesticides and other types of harmful things, are actually some of the top filers. For instance, Monsanto's gotten a ton of bad press about its filing, but their transgenic programs and their resistance programs and their chemical application programs, they're basically one of the biggest filers in the U.S. for those types of protections. Also, as you can see here, the seed producers and the biofuel producers also have a very strong performance showing here as far as top players. One of the people you'd expect to see, John Deere, is in there, but they're the biggest and kind of the only one in the full-on AgTech. Now, I also wanted to draw attention to Strong Forest IoT. Strong Forest IoT is a non-practicing entity. It hasn't sued anybody as of yet, but they certainly are accumulating a very large portfolio in this category. And their stuff, which I'll touch on later, is very, very much more in the software arts. But they're the only people that kind of pop into the top that aren't either in ag chem or seed programs or biofuel. So you can kind of see where the world is running. You can see, the fossil fuel industry, Shell Oil, also has substantial biofuels. Dow AgroScience, and I think somebody's all rolled up to there now, but there's a fair number of active corporate players here. Another company another entity that kind of pops out is the Department of Agriculture. They are actively filing climate change mitigation technologies and remediation technology for soil and other types of climate change focused agricultural practices. So despite what the top of the government might be saying, the U.S. Agricultural Department is still turning out consistently good R&D in this respect. So what are some of the takeaways here? As I said, in the U.S., commercial organizations are essentially the biggest movers. In many cases, some of the commercial organizations who are most criticized for being involved in climate change are some of the biggest movers filing in climate change. University NGOs seem to be only heavily patenting in China. Again, I didn't see that. UC Davis came up as the largest of the universities filing, but it didn't consistently fall into any of the top versions that I had. So that's the head scratcher, because you would think that there would be much more theoretical research on this area, but a lot of this tends to be the extension of existing product lines. As I was a child farmer with my parents, we were working on soil conservation, renewable methods of keeping your soil healthy and clean, pulling nitrogen and carbon dioxide and training that into the soil. So a lot of the practices, especially the agricultural practices of making your soil better, were climate change mitigation, techniques and functions. Long before this was there, this is 1960s, 1970s tech. So a lot of the AgTech companies are just taking these as natural extensions of their existing product and innovation and making this move further and further into better treatment for the soil, better treatment for the water processes, so forth and so on. And as I mentioned, the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture is consistently filing climate change mitigation patents. Latest filing is in November 2019, all the way back to 2000. So despite political statements, they have been, on the forefront, leading aspects of this from their own research and their own filings. If we break this down into CPC classes, you can see the Y categories do represent a significant number in these categories. However, if we look at the C classes here, which are all chemical classes, you can see that a good 50% of these CCM, climate change mitigation workflows are in the chemical classes. So it was remarkable here to see that very few of these were actually in the software classes of G or electronics chess or any of the transmission stuff. So for the moment, in this, it's all going to be chemical or something along that line, which makes it very hard to foresee any of the leadership roles changing in filings in this marketplace anytime soon. 102 rejection impact. So this is going to take a little bit of explaining. 102 rejections are people in the industry's patents, and I apologize for the small writing in this one, but I'm trying to get a lot of information in one slide. About people who have pivotal patents in the marketplace. So their patents have caused, in this case in green, a 102 rejection on somebody else's patents. So this is of their entire AgTech portfolio, or the segment of the portfolio that would be appropriate for AgTech. These are the companies that have caused the most upset for other people's patents going forward. So I call this 102 rejection impact because it isn't about how many patents you have, it's about how many good patents have been used to kill off other patents in U.S. prosecution. So this is a relatively new way of looking at portfolio, and so I hope this was a sufficient explanation, but I can also spend more time on this if people want to ask questions. What comes out of this is that the seed companies, especially the Pioneer Hybrid, as well as some of the agroscience people, have been very, very effective at creating new strains, which are successful strains, and they're also knocking other people's patents out as other people bring patents to play in this space. Again, Monsanto, also another big winner. Novozymes, another big winner in the chem side. But General Electric was a surprise for me. They were not in a lot of this sort of spaces in their analytics. So in looking deeper at General Electric, it really came down to a lot of their wind and power generation using wind had a lot of egg-based rejections. So this pulled in an awful lot of interesting patents from essentially other areas besides YO2 that showed a fair amount of impact in the egg space, in the AgTech space. So wind, for the first time in this analytic series, came in as something that changed a lot of things. UOP is part of Honeywell. They do a lot of renewable energy, a lot of renewable energy management tools, so they came in as having quite a number of interesting tools. And you get into some of the, the standard mobile G06 companies, Samsung, and companies like that. Again, limited show up of companies like John Deere or AGCO or CNH Industries. So CNH Industry is another one of the large tractor producers out there. But predominantly, fuel, seeds, ag chem, chemical applications for climate change, wind, and biofuel really came out as the ones having the most impactful patents in their portfolio. Again, some of the the usual suspects in that set, but I've got another top 10 slide out, so will make this easier to see kind of what they focus on later in the presentation here. So really kind of an interesting thought about who has the most impact in their individual patents. Again, a unique way of looking at the AgTech marketplace. So let's move on to pure AgTech itself. So we dive down into the John Deere's and the AGCOs and the CNHs of the world. Again, there's an awful lot of tech that really isn't agricultural per se related. I mean, we're looking at a lot of carbon scrubbing. We're looking at a lot of carbon dioxide capture from air. We're looking at removing greenhouse gases from the air. Dealing with waste streams, everything from pesticides to, again, carbon capture. So gas scrubbing, gas removal, or greenhouse gas removal comes in almost number one in most of these categories and subcategories as we're reading through this. Engine and vehicle technology, making your engine burn more efficiently, making your exhaust produce less fuel, or produce less greenhouse gases. A lot of stuff along that area, and then also very little bit about how you treat your fields, as in the field tech side. So there weren't any surprises in this, other than the fact that a whole lot of focus in the last 5 years about taking greenhouse gases out of either the waste stream or the exhaust of the vehicle, almost to the exclusion of many other things. So one to particularly notice is taking carbon dioxide, CO2 from air extraction. This is, I think, a really interesting area of technology going forward, so watch this space. Now I mentioned Strong Force earlier. So Strong Force, again, is a Information of Things patent holder. And a surprising number of their patents really have some aspects to go around all the smart processes and tools around ag. And so I found a number of their patents to be quite ag focused, and not just an oh by the way mention of it, and also focusing commentary towards climate change mitigation as well. So I use the term NP. They're really not they haven't shown themselves to be a litigation based MP at this point, but they are out there making deals and whatnot out there. So another company that I think that bears watching is the Strong Force Capital Management, which is the IoT portfolio. Moving right along here, so we'll talk a little bit about litigation. Litigation in ag tech around climate change. Not a lot of it happening. It's sporadic at best, and in many cases non-existent from one year to the next. So it's an area of space that we're going to watch carefully as things happen in this area. We'll probably see a lot more of this spiking here, given the number of patents being filed, especially by people who are not not normally from the industry. So let's go into kind of the best of lists here. So one of the ways that other analytics groups do a fair amount of analytics is look at forward citation. So I figured I would do forward citation analytics here as a good place to start. And it does show a lot of players who are not highly focused don't come out in the top filings, but they do come out again with more citations. So again, Monsanto has been a long-term favorite, but Watricity an e-vehicle or an kind of a e-vehicle company that has popped up with a lot of citations into kind of farm implementation or vehicles around ag and used in the ag process. So that was really kind of the first indicator that I saw e-vehicles as something special into the AgTech marketplace. Moving on to Corbion, another one, their focus was bioplastics and food ingredients. Again, related to ag process, AgTech, but not directly in the sense. iRobot, no, I was not expecting in this, but they seem to be doing a fair amount of filing in this respect as well. At least their filings are getting a lot of citations from other patents in the actual AgTech space. And looking deeper in that portfolio, it's a lot of it's around both drone, flying drone, or else in driving drone type of vehicles for various and sundry monitoring and sensing purposes. Aerolac came out as a gas scrubber, so again, greenhouse gas scrubbing, as well as, again, some of the usual suspects of the fossil fuel industry, Halliburton and ExxonMobil. Zchem and Butamax also came out as biofuel related as well. So there were, again, as I mentioned, some surprises in this. There were, a lot of the people who are being cited in the YO2 category as forward cited are not necessarily truly in this category as well. And so, again, I always caution people when you're using citation analysis, it should be a good place to start, but it is never a good place to end in your analytic discussion. So, again, I produce this as more of an oh, by the way, versus anything of great use for working forward. The next one is, again, I did forward rejection leaders. Again, this is a much harder category, I think, to do well in. And so these are companies that were identified in the climate change mitigation field, and their patents tend to be used or cited highly as rejections for other companies. So as you see, the counts across, say, 25,000 patents are much fewer. So Monsanto, which had previously 7,200 and more than 7,200 forward citations. Of those forward citations, only 111 of those were cause for actual 1 or 2 rejections in the U.S. Patent Office. So this is why I tend to look at this metric as being a better metric for discovering what's really mattering in the marketplace. So as you can see, a lot of the same players from the last list popped up here, but again, fewer of them showed up, as well as other players who were not in this earlier list showed up as well. So the new ones have been highlighted here with the in quotations versus, they were all in quotations over here, or in, not quotations, but brackets. But you can kind of see here that, again, Witricity is here with 3,600 forward citation. Here they only show up with 67 102 counts. So again, another point to prove that citation analysis is limited. Again, so we see a lot of transgenics companies coming forward. So transgenics appears to have a lot of impact when in their 102. So the companies that have transgenic tool sets are much more likely, I think, here to have, I think, good technology that is effective at, maintaining a business advantage for them in those marketplaces, just from this high-level statistical analysis. Again, iRobots here as well. Another company kind of came in out of the blue was this James Hardie. For a lot of the residential owners of houses in the U.S., you recognize James Hardie as a building material, more directly a siding company, which sells you siding that is immune to bugs and whatever else because it's partly cement. They came in as being quite defensive in a lot of the eco building materials. So in building material of farm buildings and other agricultural buildings, and so they came in as being quite effective at blocking, given their size. John Deere came back in this case, their war objections were much more directed towards precision farming, as one might expect. And then Danisco came in much more from what it's making using egg products or from yeasts, funguses, and other forms of fermentation in their outcome products. So again, worth looking at. Again, I would always bias towards a forward 102 rejection over a citation and analytic to tell you what's better information about someone and their patent portfolio. So we're coming up to kind of the last 5 minutes of my presentation, and to the degree you have questions, please ask them. Otherwise, we'll just race on here. So what really came out in the forward trends is we saw a lot of the trends that I highlighted were gross trends. So the gas capture, gas scrubbing, carbon capture, methane capture, methods of changing the feed to cows so they produce less methane, or to other ruminants. There's a whole lot of effort going into knocking down carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and methane from the greenhouse gas metaphor. It cannot be reiterated how much that trend is growing. The regenerative farming. Regenerative farming is from the good old days of soil management, is how to treat your soil, how to treat your crop well, so in that you capture more nitrogen in your soil, you capture more carbon dioxide in your soil, you entrain and enrich your soil by pulling the gases down. And so the greenhouse gases get pulled in and locked into the soil for a period of time at least, using regenerative farming. They're also working on seeds that work well. Part of the notion of regenerative farming is also that you are planting cover crops before you plant your cash crop. So cereal rye is one of the ones that comes in quite prevalently in some of these techniques. There's a bunch of interesting implements and how to plant through a cover crop and stuff. So stuff that in some ways is restating what the local agricultural department told us to do to our farms 30 years ago, has been regenerated, pun intended, and put into kind of new ways of thinking about farming, new ways of not spraying with pesticides and herbicides and things to keep your plants from being attacked by the local pests. So very interesting area, a great area to watch. Greenhouse tech, vertical farming, also a lot of patent filings are on hydroponics. This is also an interesting area because for those who track the CBD or cannabinoids marketplace, there's a ton of AgTech around cannabis farming. So I kind of kept that out because that's probably its own presentation here. But as you saw in China, greenhouse, water management, anything around kind of growing in a contained and constrained environment, a lot of growing trends in that respect. And as we all know from all of our news reports, autonomous ag, precision ag, drones, other sorts of autonomous vehicles, tractors that drive themselves, crops that are harvested by autonomous robots. A ton of investment in that from a patent filing standpoint. Very little, though, is in kind of the grander scheme of things coming out, because the chemical side comes out as such a heavy and huge aspect of patent filing. In decline. So there was a whole industry created around carbon trading a while back. A lot of patents were filed on that. A lot of financial service companies were filing patents. That seems to have largely stopped. Not because I don't think there's probably a future for it, but it just, it doesn't seem the excitement around that has changed to any great degree anymore. So coming with some closing thoughts here, then we can open for questions or let everybody get back to their daily lives. IP filings as a social consciousness indicator indicate a continuing and present concern, thought process around climate change. What's surprising or not surprising is some of the most significant polluting entities, whether it's China and as a whole, various industries that are chemical-based, Monsanto and some of its other brethren, very heavily investing in the climate change mitigation environment. It's broad spectrum technology. There's no one thing that just sticks out and said, oh, they're only focusing on this. It is literally from anything mechanical, it's everything software. They're using chemical treatments, they're using genetics, hybridization, transgenic techniques. They're using whatever they can use to help create things that will continue to operate even in a strongly modified climate change environment. It's prevalent in all the country's filings and in all the grants. There's nobody that is more socially conscious, it seems, than the next one, except for maybe China, which again would be a little bit, probably a little bit worth a longer discussion. But U.S., despite its political aspect, leads the filings of all other countries but for China, and there's absolutely no indication this is slowing down. So that's essentially my presentation. I do not have any questions from the audience here. So with that, unless you want to hold, we're open for a few more minutes. But otherwise, I thank you for listening. I thank you for your attention on a day when there's a lot of news going on. So appreciate your time. And with that, I'll stand by for any other questions. Otherwise, thank you for your time.